Now this is a build video I think we've all been ready for quite some time now. The video where we make this car a complete car again. Recently I found a smashed 240 that was hidden in the woods and I picked it up for parts. I was able to strip the quarter panel off of the car and it came out perfect. There are a few dents on it here and there, but I'm not worried about that at all because there's no rust and there's no major body damage on this one. And for those of you who've been watching my channel, you know this is a great success because the first quarter panel I picked up was full of rust and the second quarter panel I picked up had body damage and it was full of Bondo. I mean from here to here. But that's okay because now we have one and we're ready to put it on the car. There are some things we need to do to the car before we can put it on. For example, that parts card that I got the quarter panel off of, I also took off the wheel well. Now there's two parts to a wheel well. There's the outer portion. This is where most people would roll it. And then there's the inside portion. And I decided to take it off with the shock tower reinforcement because I felt like that might be easier to align it to the car itself. And I also have this roof jig in my car that I can use to bolt in this new wheel well. For example, it bolts in down here near the seatbelt hole and also to the shock tower. Although there's not a shock tower in there, I can still bolt it in by the seatbelt hole. Now you're probably wondering why I'm replacing the inside wheel well. Well, this is actually spliced together. It's not the worst thing ever, but if I can get one that's not spliced and install it how they would from the factory, I would much rather go that route. So the very first step is going to be taking off this inner wheel well. Now I already went ahead and grinded off all the adhesive along the spot welds I need to drill out, and I also drilled the pilot holes in each spot weld. And if you want to know more about drilling out the spot welds and finding where they are under the adhesive, I'll be sure to attach my recent video where I showed disassembling this entire quarter panel and the wheel well. If you're looking to tackle a job like this, replacing a panel, that video may be really useful for you. But now that all the pilot holes are drilled, I just need to take my spot weld drill bit, go along each of these and drill out each hole. And since we're taking the shock tower reinforcement off as well, we also need to take off these in here. So I've just drilled out all the spot welds and you can already tell some of the panels are free, even the back here on the shock tower, but these are not free. They don't even budge, and I'm pretty sure that's because the sealant that is used to glue these panels together is holding them together. So now what I need to do is go along every seam on the inside here with a wire wheel and try and grind out all of the adhesive. You can kind of see this adhesive here. It's really thick. I'll even have to get in here because this is all gooped up from the factory and this whole piece needs to come out. So I grinded away a majority of the adhesive. Now I can begin prying these panels apart. Oh yeah, see, it's already freeing up. Just work your way down. Well, it looks to me like we are catching on something over here. And that is because I just remembered we need to make a cut from here down. Because in order to get this panel off, you technically need to take off the entire rocker panel, which I'm not trying to do, honestly. I'm just not trying to go there. We'll conjoin the new wheel well the same way. Because that's exactly how I cut it off the parts car. Looks like we're still stuck on something down here. Did I miss a spot weld? Oh, I don't think that one went through enough. I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner, but I could just look at the holes on this wheel well, and I'm realizing I missed this hole. Yeah, there's supposed to be another spot weld right here. Ooh. Still? Oh my gosh. That's all it's being held on by? Finally. Wow, that looks crazy. We need to now grind away all the adhesive that's left over from those two panels being seamed together, because we need to have a nice surface to weld to. And there's even surface rust building up in between these panels. Oh, this actually doesn't look too bad down here. I thought that'd be a lot more beat up. And this part I need to clean up as well. That's where the half cut of the car was replaced, and this is the original chassis here. Our metal is looking nice and clean. We are ready to weld onto this all the way around, and as well as the inside. Now I will have to prep that inner wheel well that I took off of the parts car because, oh wait, this is one I just took off. Because there is still adhesive and paint all over it. That's not a good surface to weld to. So let me just knock that out real quick. Oh, look at that. It's all done. Perfecto. Now we just got a test fitted on here. This should be fun, especially because these two spots on the shock tower have to be wedged in between right here. That's where those two holes go. Oh, I also need to trim this up to here. I lined up the wheel arch that we took off of the car and measured it along this new arch that we're putting on, and realized that this one is just a little bit too long and that will hit right here. For the very first test fit, this is not bad. Just looking at it sitting in there, it looks great. Now obviously this isn't going to hold itself down, but when it's pushed down, it fits perfectly. And one very important thing I need to make sure I do before I start welding this car back together, and I wonder if anyone else thought about this, I need to level out the rear end. So basically I'm going to need to jack up the rear of the car, put a level on the rear, and verify that this is level, as well as the roof line. Because this is a very structural piece of the car, and it's not like there's a C pillar or a B pillar here to really hold the car together. So really this whole rear left side of the car is just sagging. It's probably wobbly. It's not. So we'll grab our level. First, make sure the ground is level. Yep. Then the trunk. Now I have this centered too on the latch. And it looks like the right side is ever so slightly higher. So we're going to use the jack. Jack up the rear left. Perfect. Now that we verified the trunk is level, let's make sure the roof is level. There's not really a nice way to set this down on the roof because it's ovaled. Alright, I guess that's good. I am going to leave the level on the trunk because I feel like that's the most important piece. Yeah, having the trunk level is probably one of the most crucial pieces at this point, considering we have a jig in the center of the car to really hold it in the correct dimension. And I really want to make sure this gets put on correctly, because if this is ever so slightly off, it'll throw off how this outer wheel well will fit, and it'll also throw off the inner skin, and lastly, it'll throw off the quarter panel. But everything does line up, which is good. So now I can take this off and prep the metal so it doesn't rust away where I can't see it, as well as spray weld through primer on all the areas that I won't be able to get to once this is welded on. And a side note, I'm going to have to remove the rest of the sound deadening so this panel sits flush, because I will have to weld this seam. And I also need to grind down some of the spot welds that are on the shock tower still. You can kind of tell this is bumped out more than the flat surface, and that was causing the new panel to not sit flush onto the shock tower. Nice and smoothed out now. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is figure out which weld through primer I want to use. I've been using this one all along, but I also heard this one is great. So how I'm going to determine which one I want to use is I'm going to spray Steel It on the left side, and I'll spray this one on the right side. Now this is nicely prepped metal, it's all cleaned up, and this is the same thickness and metal that we're going to be welding later on, so this would be perfect to practice on as well. Oh, this one's white. And while these paints are drying, I want to also undercoat the inside of this frame rail section here while it's open. So this is what I've been using on the car, this Eastwood internal frame coating. So I'll spray that in there, and then once this dries, I will put 3M cavity wax on top. I had a few friends that work at body shops, and this is what they've recommended me to use. While we have that paint drying, I'm going to go ahead and spray Steel It onto the chassis. It comes out so fast, so thick. This is looking really nice now, all prepped and ready to be welded. And this I let sit for a while, and it's already dry, ready to go. And this is also dry and ready to go. So we're gonna put some cavity wax in here just so this can be drying while we're welding this. Whew, nasty. All right, first things first, let's dial in the welder setting. So my welder is set at 3, which is the middle heat range, and then around 40 for the wire speed. The gas is open, and I have the pressure valve set to, oh, looks like it jumped on me. Let me adjust that, so turn it down. Hit the trigger. Check the gauge again. Alright, yeah, that's fine. In between 10 and 15 LPMs is about perfect. Now we hook our ground clamp up, something metal, and we don't need to snip this because you can just go like this. So I'm going to start with tacking just plain metal as it is, and then make sure the settings are good, and then we'll tack each paint spot. Alright, let's see how it looks. The welder settings were perfect. First one here, no paint. Second one, steel it. This one was the zinc coated one. And just to confirm, each weld had perfect penetration into the panel. So there you go, I guess they both work. Now my next step is going to be spraying steel it onto this panel and installing it onto the car. Alright, so we got it on the car. Now it's going to be very difficult to line up every piece of this panel all at once. So what I'm thinking of doing is using all of these clamps that I have and clamping them each in a position where they are in the correct spot. And another interesting fact, the 89 to 90 single cam chassis is different from the 91, 92, 93 chassis, the dual cam chassis. I discovered this last year when I was deconstructing the frame rails, and I realized that the dual cam chassis is actually reinforced. It has additional spot welds and reinforcement plates within. So not all of these spot welds are going to line up directly because my chassis is a 90, so it's a single cam chassis. And this wheel well and quarter panel came off of a dual cam chassis. So for example, you can kind of tell none of these top spot welds line up. Some of these corner ones do line up perfectly, but see, corner, nothing, 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 corner. But that's all right, that's just chassis knowledge. Not to mention when these are being assembled, they're not all spot welded in the exact same location. Check this out, we have the inner wheel well completely clamped into position. Basically, I tried to utilize each corner, except for that one. And now it's pretty secure, even though it's not welded at all, but it looks great. What do we think? What do we think? Ready to weld this in? It's a good thing I already figured out the welder settings, so we're ready to go. The inner wheel well is fully tacked into position, and I only tack welded it first because I wanted to verify that it fits correctly before I fully weld it in, because I can still drill out these tiny little tacks and adjust it if I need to. But overall, this is lining up very nicely. I'm very happy with this. Let's test fit the outer wheel well. Well, that's not going to sit flush because I have to trim it, but I mean, everything back here looks fine. All these line up. This outer wheel well came off the same car as this inner wheel well, so these spot welds should line up. This is looking great. I barely even tack welded any of these seams, and they're already filling up very nicely. The inner wheel well is now completely welded into position. I filled in all of the spot weld holes and also placed a couple additional stitch welds along the inside because while we're here we might as well stiffen up the chassis a little bit considering how loose these are from the factory. Even went ahead and did it on this side as well. So that is super satisfying. This looks great on there. Now our next step is going to be lining up the outer wheel well. Always test fit. This panel is lining up really nice. I only have 3 vice grips holding it on and nearly every single spot weld. These bottom ones aren't going to line up exactly how we want them because the panel is currently hitting the inside lip here. And this is not a cut line. This is just so I know where the panels overlap. And before we take it off, let's just verify the back. Oh yeah, that looks good. Definitely lines up. And while I'm at it, I might as well grind off all of this adhesive in here because we can't have that on there when we're welding it. This is about how much was overlapping. So I'm going to leave about an inch, maybe less, because we don't need this much of an overhang. Grinded all the metal on all the surfaces we will be welding, and I messed up. I drew the overlap line on this panel. I went and grabbed some water, set the camera up, and then I cut it on the outline. And that is after I mentioned I wanted ½ an inch of overlap. This is why it's important to draw your cut line, and I like to hash the overlap line. That way you make sure that you don't cut on that line. So at least now we have a pre-bent panel that we can use to fill the gap if there is one. But let's mount this panel up and see how it fits now. It's really unfortunate, but that's all right. We're gonna work through it. All right, we got the clamps on here, and this is what we're looking like. honestly, that could work. There is a slight gap towards the end here. This will be no issue at all, and actually sits in there very nicely. That's pretty good. That's pretty nice. So now my next step is to spray weld through primer on the panel, inside and out. It's always a good idea to wipe the panel down to get all the extra junk off of it. That way it's not sitting on the inside of the paint. Oh, here's a perfect example. Get all this junk off of here. All right, this is all primered up and ready to be installed. Clamps are installed. Now we just need to weld it on. The first section of the outer wheel well that I want to weld is going to be this seam on the bottom that we messed up. With these two ends butted together, I'm going to need to lower the heat setting, because if it's too high, it'll just burn right through it. If you're welding on a panel towards the edge, it will not take the heat as well. Versus if it's on a spot weld, it has material all around it to absorb that heat. And I have two clamps towards the bottom just to ensure this panel gap is sealed pretty nicely. And honestly, this gap does not look too bad. So let's see how it turns out. This came out a lot nicer than I was anticipating. Perfect. Well, that's good. Now I can continue tack welding this outer wheel well into position, but I cannot fully weld this in. Because if you guys remember, this inner structure, which is actually the reinforcement for the quarter panel, has to go on top of all these spot welds. So all of these need to align, but I can tack weld these into position. You can kind of tell there's still a gap in between some of these panels here where there's not a clamp. And that's going to be really hard to clamp together with this skin on top. You know what I mean? And these bottom ones also have to be fully welded. This panel only goes to here, which is right here on this car. I actually left this on here just as a reference to verify that this will line up, and it does. So I will most likely be taking this one off as well and just utilizing the one that we have already attached to the skin. Well, I was going to wait to take this off later, but it's kind of in the way of my panels here, so just... Side note, I did actually drill out two of those spot welds. One of them was not even connected. We're making great progress. I'm sure there's a tool for this, but honestly, these vice grips work just fine. Alright, I may have gone a little overboard with tack welding the outer wheel well on. I ended up fully welding it on, but then grinding all of the welds flush so that this new panel will sit on here nice and smoothly. But it's really great to see a wheel well back on the car. It's starting to feel like the quarter panel may actually be installed sooner than I thought. Now we have two options here for the inner skin. This first one here came off of the same car as this wheel well and the quarter panel. Although the car wasn't rusty overall, I did find a pretty decent rust spot on the C-pillar, which I thought was really strange. And that was the only thing that really had an issue with. But a major reason I do want to run this one is because the C-pillar and B-pillar are still connected, versus this one. This actually came off a rusty car, although the inner skin is not too rusty. You can really tell how flimsy this is, and these points don't line up. Now, I was planning to match them to these points on the car already, but if I can get one that is already lined up, and I know for sure that's in the correct dimension, I would much rather use this one. So my next steps are going to be prepping this quarter panel, getting all the paint and surface rust off of it, as well as figuring out where I need to trim the top. I do still want to keep this ridge in one piece, but I will have to trim some of the B-pillar down, because we have a whole B-pillar here, and also figure out what's going on with this. Another thing to mention is this roof came off of the same car as the half cut. When I cut this roof off to transport it, I use a sawzall and just zoom. The correct way to disconnect the B-pillar is through the spot welds along the seam here. You can tell this is the roof seam and this is the quarter panel section, and this is where they meet up. Looking back, I would have done it differently, but that just shows how much I've learned in the process of doing all of this. So now I'm faced with some decisions, and I'm thinking ahead here on how I want to trim this. So this is technically where it should be conjoined, but this is not looking very nice. So I think a better option would be to trim this B-pillar maybe up to around here, and then I can cut a straight line on this one and then have a small 1/2 inch overlap on them. And then I can take off the quarter panel and also weld the inside, because with it butted together like that, that's not very structural for a B-pillar, which is another reason why the spot welds are not in one line. They are diagonal to each other. So I'll have to figure out where I want to slice this. And as for this part, I already welded on the roof to the C-pillar. This is actually the original C-pillar to the car, and it's fully welded on. That panel that is fully seam welded is this panel. So I might have to trim this back. No, actually, I'll probably have to trim that one back and keep this one attached, but I will still probably have to take it apart to get rid of this rust, because I do not like that. I don't know. We'll figure it out, but I'm going to start with prepping it. It's just good to think ahead and weigh out your options, especially when you're doing a mindless task like grinding paint and rust off of something. Your mind will just start thinking of ideas on how you can overcome these problems. Well, I hate to do it to you guys, but I have to split this video in half. Don't forget to drop a like on the video, and we're almost at 100,000 subscribers, which is super exciting. Make sure you're not one of the culprits that got randomly unsubscribed, and I'll see you guys next time. I'll be out here in the garage making sure this quarter panel gets done, because there are a couple events coming up in the next month or two, and my goal is to have the 240 there, drifting too. So yeah, big stuff coming. I can't wait. Peace.